I've always known there was something off about Middleditch High, with its eerie hallways and the musty smell that permeates the old brick walls. The worst of it, however, comes from a small, seldom mentioned closet tucked away under the staircase in the abandoned West Wing. I first heard about it in a whispered rumor, one that chilled my bones and piqued my curiosity too intensely. They said it was once the janitor's closet, but not just any janitor, Mr. Loomis, a man whose presence still haunted the school decades after he was fired. Today, drawn by a mix of fear and thrill, I find myself standing before the closet door. The paint is peeling, creating patterns that almost look like faces screaming in agony. I push open the door, and a cold gust of wind blows out, extinguishing the light from my flashlight for a moment. When the light flickers back to life, I see the narrow space stretching impossibly far back, far deeper than the school's blueprint would allow. Stepping inside, the door slams shut behind me, and I'm enveloped by darkness. The air is thick, musty, filled with the smell of old, wet mops and something faintly metallic. I flick on my flashlight again, revealing a corridor lined with doors. Each door is marked with a classroom number, but these are numbers I've never seen on any school map. I open one door, peering inside. It looks like a classroom, but twisted, wrong. The desks are arranged in a circle, each one scratched and covered in what looks like dried blood. On the blackboard, written over and over is, "Cleanliness is next to godliness." A shuffling sound makes me turn. Down the hall, the flicker of a shadow. Heart pounding, I follow. Each classroom reveals another horror. A science lab with jars filled with unidentifiable specimens. An art room where the paintings scream silently from their canvases. The deeper I go, the more the air feels alive, buzzing with a silent scream. Then, I see him. Mr. Loomis, the janitor, at the end of the corridor. He's tall, his uniform grimy, and in his hand, he clutches a rusty old mop. His eyes, hollow and dark, fix on me. "You're late," he rasps, his voice echoing off the walls. I try to run, but the floors have turned slick, sticky under my feet. He advances, slow and deliberate. "It's time to clean up," he hisses. Panicking, I dart into the nearest room, a library with books that seem to moan as I brush past them. In the center, a large tome rests open. The pages flutter as if caught in a breezy, and I see it's a logbook. The names of students, dozens of them, all marked with a red X. My fingers tremble as I turn the pages, the reality dawning on me. These students had all disappeared without a trace. I hear the squeak of his mop getting closer. With no way out, I brace myself against the shelves, pushing them over. Books cascade down, and I use the moment to slip past him, sprinting back toward the closet door. The corridor seems to stretch and distort as I run, the screams of the damned classrooms growing louder. Finally, I reach the door, throwing it open to the dim light of the school hallway. I don't stop running until I'm out of the building, the fresh air filling my lungs, chasing away the stench of decay. Breathing hard, I look back at the school. From the outside, it seems normal, untouched by the horrors within. But I know better. I know that deep within Middleditch High, behind a simple janitor's closet door, lies a twisted version of this place, overseen by a malevolent spirit who is far from done with his duties. I can never tell anyone. Who would believe me? But I know I have to warn the new students somehow. Because somewhere in that dark, twisted school, Mr. Loomis is preparing for his next cleanup, and I fear what will happen if he ever runs out of messes to clean. For as long as I can remember, Mr. Harrow's house next door stood unusually silent. Even as a child, I never heard the typical sounds of domestic life emanating from within. No television buzz, no clattering dishes, not even the echoes of conversation. The windows, perpetually curtained, sometimes flickered with shadows that seemed too fluid, too quick to be human. The neighborhood often whispered about the reclusive old man and his eerily quiet home, crafting tales spookier than the last. It was an unspoken agreement among us kids to avoid the place, especially after dusk. But nothing piqued my curiosity, or my fear, more than the night. A piercing scream shattered our quiet street's calm. It was just past midnight, and the sound was so raw, so desperate, that it rooted me to the spot in my bedroom. The scream seemed to come from Mr. Harrow's house. I peered out, heart pounding, as the silence swiftly closed back in, like water settling after a thrown stone. That was the moment I decided to investigate, against every instinct screaming at me to do otherwise. The next morning, with the street bathed in sunlight and normalcy, I approached Mr. Harrow's front door. The closer I got, the more oppressive the silence became. It felt like walking into thick, unseen fog. I knocked, hesitatingly at first, then with more force. There was no response, not even the sound of footsteps. It was as if my knocks were swallowed by the door itself. With a growing sense of dread, I tried the handle. To my surprise, it turned under my hand, and the door creaked open onto an abyss of silence so deep it buzzed in my ears. Inside, the air was cool and stale, the hallway ahead shadowed and unwelcoming. "Mr. Harrow?" I called out, but my voice made no sound. It was as though I had become mute. As I ventured deeper into the house, the shadows grew denser, more animated. I could almost feel them brushing against me, their cold touch sending shivers down my spine. I stumbled upon the living room where the curtains were drawn tight, but it was the pictures on the walls that halted my steps. They were all of Mr. Harrow, but with every progression in age, he appeared increasingly distraught, his eyes wide with terror. In the most recent photo, his features were almost entirely distorted by fear. Then I heard it, a low moan that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It was a sound full of such anguish and despair that I covered my ears, but I felt the vibration through the floorboards. I followed it, each step more reluctant than the last, down to the basement where the moan grew into a cacophony of silent screams. The basement was a labyrinth of old furniture and boxes, and at its center, a bizarre contraption that hummed with an eerie energy. It was a machine, large and metallic, with tubes and wires that webbed across the ceiling and walls. As I approached, the air grew denser, harder to breathe. The machine pulsed, and with each pulse, the shadows danced more frenetically. There, taped to the side of the device, was a journal, Mr. Harrow's. It detailed his experiments with sound, how he'd discovered a way to absorb it, to harness it for energy. But the machine had grown beyond his control, consuming not just sound, but life itself, its hunger insatiable. I slammed the journal shut, the silence enveloping me thicker than before. Panic set in as I realized the house was alive, feeding off every sound, every scream. I turned to run, but the shadows moved to block my path, swirling around me like dark water. I never remembered how I got out, only that I found myself back in my room, the door to Mr. Harrow's house firmly closed, as if it had never been opened. The quiet was deeper now, suffocating, as if warning me never to speak of what I'd found. But some nights, when the world is especially silent, I swear I hear the distant hum of Mr. Harrow's machine and the soft, despairing moans of the shadows trapped within the walls of the house that devours all sound, and more. I've been a maintenance worker at the old Carver's food processing plant for just over 3 years. The place is a massive, sprawling complex of stainless steel and concrete, shadows clinging to every corner like cobwebs. It's known for its eerie quietness, except for the rhythmic hum of machinery that never fully shuts down, even after the evening whistle blows. Lately, something's changed. Whispered voices began floating through the corridors about 2 months ago. They were soft, nearly indistinguishable from the whir of the machines, but unmistakably human. At first, I thought it was the stress of the job, or maybe I was just hearing the echoes of workers long gone. But then, others started hearing it too. "Can you hear them? The whispers?" asked Jonah, a fellow worker, as we sat in the break room. His eyes were wide, reflecting a mix of curiosity and fear. "Yeah, I do," I admitted, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly. "Where do you think they're coming from?" Jonah leaned closer, his voice dropping to a hushed tone. "The old boiler room. But it's been sealed for years, since the accident." Everyone knew about the accident. A catastrophic failure had occurred in the boiler room years before I started working here. It was an explosion that resulted in several deaths, the room sealed off as a grim reminder and a precaution. Driven by a mix of dread and intrigue, Jonah and I decided to investigate after our shift. The whispers grew louder as we approached the sealed door, the air thickening, heavy with the scent of burnt metal and old oil. With a hefty crowbar, we pried open the rusty door. The room was stifling, oppressively hot, as if the boiler was still running at full capacity. It made no sense. The power had been cut off decades ago. The whispers became clearer, morphing into urgent, pained pleas. "Help us. Stop the fire. It burns." Jonah staggered back, clutching his ears. "What is this place?" he gasped, his face pale and glistening with sweat. "I don't know, but we should leave," I said, though my feet seemed rooted in place, mesmerized by the eerie glow that seemed to pulsate from the heart of the boiler. "No, listen. It's him." Jonah pointed towards a shadow that had begun to materialize in the center of the room. The figure was vaguely human, distorted by the shimmering air, its voice now a commanding roar. "Turn it off, before it happens again." I realized then that this spirit, this remnant of a past tragedy, was trapped in its last moments, forever reliving the horror of the accident. It wanted closure, needed someone to prevent the imaginary catastrophe it believed was still imminent. Acting on impulse, I rushed to the old control panel, my hands trembling as I pretended to shut down the system. The room began to cool almost immediately, the spirit's form beginning to dissipate. "Thank you," it whispered, its form fading into nothingness, leaving behind a cold, silent emptiness. Jonah and I stumbled out, sealing the door behind us. We never spoke of it again at work, agreeing silently that some things were better left unshared. But the whispers never returned, and the plant felt somehow lighter, freed from the weight of its tragic past. That night I lay awake, thinking about the spirit. It was trapped in an endless loop of fear and regret, a potent reminder of the frailty of life and the weight of unfinished business. I realized then that some rooms are sealed for a reason, not just to keep people out, but to contain the things that were never meant to roam free.